Welcome to episode 88 of Lucretius Today. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists from the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem, and we'll discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. For anyone who is not familiar with our podcast, please visit EpicureanFriends.com and let us know if you have any questions or comments. In this episode 88, we'll continue in Book 6, and we will read approximately Latin lines 703 through 818 as we discuss the waters of the Nile and the sulfur pits that kill the birds that fly over them. Now let's join Don reading today's text.
Besides, the sea for a great way dashes its waves against the roots of this mountain, and then again sucks up its tide. The waters press into these caverns that lie directly under those open jaws above. This you must allow, and the flames yielding to the driving flood there force their passage out, and fly abroad, and cast the fire on high, and throw out rocks, and raise whole clouds of sand. For on the summit there are certain basins where wind is generated. The Greeks call them so. We call them mouths and jaws. There are some things, observe, for which it is not sufficient to assign one reason, but many, out of which only one is true. And when you see the dead body of a man lying at a distance upon the ground, you are to recollect all the causes which possibly might occasion his death in order to find out the right. For you cannot correctly say whether he died by the sword, or by cold, or by disease, or perhaps by poison, though we know it was by one of these, and everyone thinks so. The same method you are to observe in many other cases. The Nile, the only river in all Egypt, increases in the summer and overflows the fields. It waters the country of Egypt about the middle of summer, either because in summer the north winds are opposite to the mouths of the river, at the season when the Etesias blow, and beating hard against the stream stop the current, and driving the waters upwards fill the channel and force back the flood. For without doubt those northern winds blow directly against the tide. The river flows from the warm climate of the south, and divides the country of the black Ethiopians that are thoroughly sodden with the sun's heat, and rises far in the most southern part of the world. And it may be that great heaps of sand that are raised against the stream choke the mouths of the river when the sea, by the violence of the winds, drives the sand into the channel and stops it up. By this means the passages of the river are more confined, and the current of the water is slower and of less force. Or, perhaps, the rains are more violent near the head of the river at that season of the year, when the Etesian winds blow from the north and drive all the clouds to the more southern parts. When the clouds meet in that warmer quarter, they are condensed and pressed hard against the high mountains, and by that force the rain is squeezed out. Or, lastly, the increase in the river may proceed from the high mountains of the Ethiopians, when the sun that searches all things with its dissolving rays forces the melted snow to descend into the plains. And now, the nature of that place or lake we call a vernon I shall next explain. And first, it takes its name from its effect, because 'tis fatal to birds. For when the feathered kind fly to this place, their flight is stopped, they flutter in the air, and fall with hanging wing and bended head upon the earth, if haply it be the earth, or in the water if it be a lake. At Cumae there is a place like this, and on the Mount Vesuvius, which, filled with burning sulfur, throws out smoke. Another of the same there is within the walls of Athens, upon the top of that high tower near which the kind Tritonian palace has her temple. Here the horse ravens never steer their flight, not when the altars smoke with slaughtered victims. They do not shun this tower to fly the rage of angry Pallas for their officious care, as Greek poets sing, but 'tis the noxious nature of the place that drives them hence. They say there's such a place as this in Syria, where beasts no sooner venture with their feet, but the pernicious vapor strikes them dead, as if by sudden stroke they fell a sacrifice to infernal gods. All these things proceed from natural causes, and what these causes are will soon appear by tracing out their principles, lest you should think in places such as these hell gates are fixed, and fancy that the gods below draw through these passages departed souls into the infernal shades, as the swift deer are said by smelling to draw out the lurking serpents from their holes. But how absurd to reason are such thoughts. Observe, for now I am going to explain. And first I say, as I have often said before, that in the earth are seeds of things of varied shape, many that prolong the life of man, and many that inflict disease and hasten death. And I have shown that there are other seeds peculiarly disposed to serve the use of other creatures and support their life. Because these seeds are different in their nature, they vary in their texture and their shape. Many hurtful seeds pass through the ears, and many sharp and stinging seeds affect the nose. Some are offensive to the touch, and some to be avoided by the sight, and others bitter to the taste. And thus you see how many things there are deadly, distasteful, odious to the sense. Some trees are so pernicious by their shade that they affect the head with grievous pain if one lies on the grass beneath the boughs. There is a tree that grows in the high hill of Helicon, whose blossoms by their smell give present death. For in the earth are seeds of every kind, variously mixed, which she with curious art separates and applies to things, as each in its own nature most requires. A lamp, just extinguished, is by its smell so offensive to the nose that it stupefies, as if a man were struck down by a fit of apoplexy. A woman will fall dead asleep as the nauseous smell of an ointment made of the testicles of the beaver. Her fine work will drop from her tender fingers, especially if she smells it when her flowers are upon her. Besides, there are many things that entirely dissolve the feeble limbs all over the body, and shake the soul within out of her place. If you stay long in a warm bath, and continue in the vessel of hot water when the belly is full, how apt will you be to faint before you get out? The suffocating power of charcoal and its stifling smell, how soon do they find a passage to the brain unless you have drank plentifully of water before? When a burning fever has seized upon the limbs, the smell of wine is like a stroke that takes away the sense. Don't you observe likewise that sulfur and bitumen, with its noxious smell, are generated in the bowels of the earth itself? And so when men pursue the veins of gold and silver, and with their tools dig in the very entrails of the earth, what hurtful vapors do the mines exhale? What deadly damps flow from the golden ore? How wretchedly the miners look, how wan their color. Have you not seen or heard how soon they die, how short their life is who are condemned to this sad servitude? The earth then must needs belch out these poisonous exhalations and send them all abroad and taint the open air.
Okay, thank you very much for reading that today, Don. I got lost there for just a minute as I was reading, so I apologize for that. I got on the wrong section. As usual, I start looking at one of the other ones like Monroe or Bailey, and I say, where in the world is he reading this from? So anyway, I apologize for that. So
I'm just making it up as I go along.
Yeah. Well, this is a week that doesn't have maybe only one passage of real philosophy to it, but a lot of interesting anecdotal commentary about life in ancient Roman times. So we start with 694. Now, we have to go back to last week and make sure that we understand. I think we're talking about Mount Etna here when it says the roots of this mountain, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, line 673 we started last week talks about the fire of Etna. So I think we're talking about that.
I did think it was interesting at the end of that paragraph. He talks about on the summit there are certain basins, and the Greeks call them so. The word in Latin is actually crateres or crater. And so it is actually, crater is from the ancient Greek for a big mixing bowl, that sort of thing. So I'm curious why he just didn't use the word crater, since it's a fine word in English now, and the Latin is throats and mouths, so it's falces and ora are the words that they use in Latin evidently for the crater of a volcano.
Yeah, that is interesting. I don't understand why he would prefer the mouth and the jaw. Seems to be actually a little bit more primitive to me than the basin does. But
well, it sounds like the Greeks called them craters, and like I said, I don't know why he used basin instead of crater, and then the Romans referred to them as mouths and jaws, because I could see, the top of the volcano, if it had a crater, would look like a mouth, and then down into it would be its throat. So I can understand the reason, but I find it interesting that our English word crater comes directly from ancient Greek.
Well, and that's the point, I guess, is that we're familiar with it because that's the term that we use. But I guess probably the word crater has some other meaning to the Greeks, that maybe it does mean basin or something like that.
Yeah, it's what they use. They mix their wine in. Yeah, it's the kind of jar they mix their wine in for their symposia. But evidently that was not the normal word for that particular geologic formation to the ancient Romans.
And I was also thinking of this in background as well as we go into this today. He's talking mostly about Etna. Now, later on in the passages today, he does mention Vesuvius, but it occurred to me to compare in time. So he's writing in like 60 BC, and Vesuvius blew up in
79 AD.
79 AD, so over 100 years after basically he's writing that. So, okay.
So it was still belching out its noxious fumes back whenever Lucretius was around. So
yeah, I guess if it had already erupted when he was writing this, he probably would have been tempted to talk about it more so than Etna.
Right.
But I guess Etna at that point was maybe the more active volcano or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I was thinking the same thing.
I mean, it's still today like that. I mean, in 2,000 years, things won't change that much typically. So that one we can then probably assume that it's like today, because I never heard of anything recent with Vesuvius, but Etna every couple of years starts doing something.
Actually, my personal knowledge of the geography is so poor. I'm familiar with Vesuvius because of all the reading about Herculaneum and Pompeii, but actually Etna doesn't make an impression on my mind when I hear talk about it. What's the deal with Etna? Is in Italy as well? Is it an active volcano in Italy?
Yeah, it belongs to Italy. It's on Sicily Island.
Oh, okay. It's on Sicily, and it is an active volcano.
Yes. Every couple of years it does something.
But it hasn't had any major explosions that caused a bunch of damage like Vesuvius has?
I mean, sometimes, if I remember it right, there were instances where people needed to flee from lava flowing out.
So it's not necessarily violent eruptions, but it's the lava flows and that sort of thing. Sort of like I can remember in Hawaii several years ago where they had the big lava flows.
Yeah. So people are warned before. So,
right.
So unless something very suddenly happens, people have enough warning time before.
Slow-moving disaster.
Mm-hmm. But it's not always like that. No? So in Japan, it happens that people died, especially fires was started at one volcano on Kyushu Island, I think. And then the fire brigade went in, and many of them died, I think, when there was a gas explosion.
Oh, yeah.
I decided I better check. My knowledge of Mediterranean geography is so poor. I had to look this up to see where Sicily was. So Sicily's the big island down at the boot or down at the toe of the boot of Italy.
The one the boot's going to kick.
One the boot's going to kick. Okay. So there's a big volcano on that island. I guess that's not altogether too far from Vesuvius.
It's up around Naples.
Yeah. Is Etna the reason that Sicily is there? Does Etna dominate the island of Sicily in some way?
These volcanoes in the region, I guess, are there because of the African plate or North African plate, however it's correctly called, and the European plate collide there. And then what happens is that the Mediterranean get pushed together. So eventually the water will be forced out and the Mediterranean Sea will disappear.
Okay. But it seems like Etna had more of an impression on these ancient Romans and Greeks as the active volcano, certainly than Vesuvius. Maybe that's their number one example of an active volcano in that time period.
That time, certainly. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay, well, as we move to 703, this is our Epicurean reasoning passage for the week, probably. And it's interesting. I thought about this as Don was reading it, and now that I see it again, he picks very interesting examples to talk about when he says that there are some things for which it is not sufficient to assign one reason. Let's pick out a dead body as the thing to talk
exactly.
about, as the example of multiple reasons.
I was thinking that same thing of all the examples you can think of. It's like, oh, yeah, let's say you see a dead man laying on the trail, ahead of you. It's like, okay, let's say that.
How often do you see that? And, of course, he has to include poison as one of the ways he could have died, because he's always into this poisoning stuff as well.
Yeah, I thought that was an odd example as well. I fully agree with you.
But out of which only one is true. That's certainly the point that we've seen over and over, is that we may not have the ability to assign a single reason, even though we know that probably there's only one reason for it. We have to just go with the fact that there may have been a number of reasons, and then if we can triangulate in on which one it was, but sometimes we're not going to be able to.
And I do think this is an important passage, because I think in some cases, and I think we might even have discussed it previously too, that he says there are multiple reasons for things, and it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this. But here explicitly he says it's okay to go looking for the one reason that it actually is. Because I think in the past we've sometimes said, well, it's okay to just let multiple options hang out there, and you don't really need to know which one it is. But here he's specifically saying, it could be this or this or this or this, but there is only one cause, and it's okay to go looking for that one cause if you can observe the conditions that tell you what it was.
But there's one funny thing here. I don't think he means it as it's written here, so maybe we can check with the other translation. So we know it was by one of these. To me, this tells me it has to be one of the four things he lists. But I don't think he really means that. So these four are just examples, and there are many more not listed.
I would agree with you, Martin. Yeah, I think that's a good interpretation of that.
Yeah, and when I look at Bailey, it says for some things there are two, not a few, for which to tell one cause is not enough. We must give more, one of which is yet the actual cause. Yeah, I think that's another example of, I don't know that the language is justifying the must, that there must only be one. It looks like it could be broad enough that he's saying that there may be only one, but maybe there's not. Maybe there's more than one.
Right. Yeah, the one I'm looking at the Perseus, I think it's the Hicks one. Yet somewhat of this sort hath come to him, we know, and thus we have to say the same in diverse cases. Yeah, that's some convoluted translation there. But
that's that semi-poetic. Emory Leonard, yeah, William Emory Leonard, 1916. Or something like that. That's probably a good example of why that's just not one of my favorites. That's very different. I can understand the story we're seeing here.
But he does sort of hedge his bets with that translation. So somewhat of this sort hath come to him. So it's like he's saying, it could be the poison or the sword or this or something like this. It happened to him.
Mm-hmm. Since this is the philosophic part, maybe more than all the rest for today, I think I'll go ahead and say this, that not to contradict what you said earlier, Don, but it also might be, you might have to really look at the language to see, you were making the point that he might be saying that it's okay to look for the one. I don't know that I necessarily see that in here. This could just be another statement that you need to remember that there could be a number of reasons. It's also possible that only one of them is true. But as far as going that next step to the question of do you seek out the one that is true, I certainly agree with you that in general we should, and that's implicit in everything. But I don't know whether that really says that or not here.
No, I think you're right. Just in looking at the Leonard translation here, I would agree with you because it definitely has to do with the translation, and that's that whole issue with translations. Which one do you look at, and you can really not really trust one. Yeah, I agree. No, I agree.
Well, and then so as we go forward, that's what we're going to be doing for the next couple of paragraphs is talking about this Nile example. It seems like when people talk about things in history or whatever, the Nile always comes up and the mysteries of the big mystery of the Nile is that it reverses its flow or something like that. Is that the deal?
They don't know why it floods every year. It floods every year, but they don't know why. That's what he's laying out
that's what he's laying out here too. But do I remember, Martin, is that true that the Nile reverses the way it flows?
I mean, it could be that at the mouth, the tide is causing something like that. So that I cannot exclude. But I don't think that this is elsewhere along the Nile the case. But the Nile did show some funny behavior. So when I tried to find out a bit more, I saw that the geohistory of that whole area is quite interesting. So the Nile used to be hundreds of meters below sea level. And it was so it didn't flow into the sea at that time. But eventually all this was filled up with sediment. And so it finally reached the Mediterranean. And the other thing is also if you look at the tributaries, this whole thing came together also as a fairly recent part of geohistory. So that that whole water system of the Nile is set up like that. And what makes it now in the poem more complicated is the Romans didn't know where the source actually was. So from what I read in the context, they could just travel down to the swamps in Sudan, and they could pass through the swamps in Sudan. So they haven't been further south to that. But apparently in the Red Sea, they did travel because they know about Ethiopia, which is south of these swamps. So they should have known from Ethiopia by sea. But from there, then, with the steep mountains, they probably couldn't get in to look further where the Nile goes, I guess. But apparently, they were close enough that they could see the snow on the top of the high mountains in Central Africa, because he's talking later about the snow and speculate that the water of the Nile comes from that snow.
That's definitely one of those things that you're taught when you're young, or just the mysteries of the Nile is where's the source. So yeah, that triggers my memory there, is that the source of the Nile is one of those issues that people have talked about for eons, it seems like. I'm probably just having a hallucination when I think that the water actually flows in a different direction. But the source of the Nile, and then like you said, Don, the flooding of the Nile, I know those have always been things that stood out to me when people were talking about the Nile. And so I guess here he's actually talking about more the source. He does seem to be talking a little bit about the blocking of the water, and maybe the water does change a little bit direction.
Yeah, I think he's trying to lay out all the different reasons that the Nile floods, since it's such a pivotal thing for Egypt.
Right.
All the ancient world. So he's laying out all the different options. Just like, the guy was killed with the sword or poison, or it's like, well, the Nile couldn't flood because of this and this and this.
Yeah, the causing of the flooding is clearly what he's mainly focused on there, it looks to me like now.
And from what I understand, I mean, he does hit on the right one there when he talks about the rains in Ethiopia and the highlands or whatever it is, because evidently that's the reason for it. But he, just sort of throws that in there as an option among all the others.
Mm-hmm.
So in going into this discussion of the Nile and the different causes of its flooding and its sources and so forth, he's illustrating his point that there are potentially multiple possibilities.
Right.
Only some of which may be true, and maybe only one of which is true.
Right.
I guess as to a source of the Nile, then there would only be one source, maybe. But, or I guess this could be two sources or more sources.
Yeah, and I was checking out the last line in the Loeb translation of that one paragraph, and he says there about the different causes for the man lying dead. It says, even so, in many cases, we have the like to say. So you are right. I don't think he's necessarily endorsing, again, investigating, searching for the right one, but it's if you have multiple reasons for something, you have to admit that it could be this or could be this or could be this.
Well, I don't want to plant the idea that we think that he ever campaigns against looking for the one if it's possible to determine it. I think that we wouldn't want anybody to take that conclusion away from it. I think the focus would be that when it's not possible to determine which is the right one, what do you do? And at that point, you simply have to keep an open mind that these multiple explanations one or more of them could be all the cause.
Right.
But I know certainly some people will argue that Epicurean philosophy doesn't promote scientific inquiry as much as it should. But I don't think that's I don't think that's the point being made here at all.
It seems the point being made is that you can't just unilaterally or dogmatically pick a position, plant your flag there, and disregard all the others.
Yes, because that would be the opposite of the scientific method. You're taking a position that you don't have evidence to support. Right. If you choose one from among the reasonable possibilities.
And disregard all your other observations and possible observations. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I go along with that. Okay.
All right. Well, let's turn to birds falling out of the air for no reason. The Alfred Hitchcock section of this for today. Now, the word averna has something to do with birds.
Yeah, I looked it up in the Loeb translation. They have a note there that it's from a ornos, which you have the a for the not prefix, and ornos like ornithology and birds. So it's like places with no birds, not birds.
Oh, okay. So
unbirded areas.
So the VERN is the bird part, and the A is without from your ablative.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, is that true? Because I think birds is obvious, no? So that the A would belong to the birds, no?
Well, according to it sounded like, at least from the Loeb note, the Loeb note, yeah, I guess that's a thing, that it was originally from Greek and then got changed into Latin, and the V got stuck in there. But you are right. I mean, that does bring up a good point, but at least that's what Loeb is saying for where the word came from.
And where it's actually located, that lake?
Is it a location? I'm still a little. So there is a Lake Avernus near Kumai that they bring up, that they said that's where it originally came from. So he's saying the ancients connected its name with ornos, meaning birdless, and evidently Virgil has a mention of it, and his version of it is aornon, and then Lucretius gives the name Avernian to all places which are fatal to birds.
Oh, I see. Because I tried to look it up, but it seems that name is hijacked by some video game, and then all my
Yeah, and I see the other note on Loeb says that Lake Avernus near Cumae was reputed to be the entrance to the underworld.
Mm-hmm. Which I guess because of all the sulfurous smells and that sort of thing. And
But it sounds like Avernian is also a general term that would apply to any volcanic type or place that gives off gases that would be fatal to animals.
Exactly. That's what you're right. You're right. It must have been one specific, like Kleenex. It's like every tissue that comes out of a box is a Kleenex now, whether it's that brand or not. So
yeah, and I don't want to go too far off into geography, but this Cumae location has always been of interest to me because I believe that Cicero had a house at Cumae, and when I frequently go back and consult the On Ends book by Cicero, I believe, if I recall correctly, he talks about that discussion that he's recorded in his book took place at his house at Cumae. So. Yeah. It appears to have been a sort of a resort area or maybe a vacation area for some of the Romans.
But that might be a different place. So that might be a different place because that one should have been close to Rome. And I don't think that's a place like that.
Well, is Vesuvius so far away from Rome that you wouldn't go there as a resort?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Because understanding is this land house of Cicero and some friends, that was they would just go for the weekend there and go back to Rome. And at that time, with what they had in traffic means, I don't think they could make it just for a weekend to Vesuvius and back.
I don't have any immediate reason to doubt what you're saying, Martin, but I'm thinking you may be wrong. I don't know if we can find that quickly enough, and it doesn't really matter. But I'm thinking that unless, like you say, there are two Cumae, and I guess the only reason it strikes me as semi-interesting is just the physical proximity, if that's the case, to Herculaneum and therefore the Epicureans in that area. But I don't know. There could be more than one Cumae. Maybe we can figure that out at some point. But anyway, okay, so we're talking about dead birds falling out of the sky. And let's see.
Yeah, so we had the dead body in the second paragraph.
Exactly.
Dead birds down here. We got, oh, man.
Yeah.
This is just a precursor to the plague. We're just getting ready for the plague.
Yeah. They flutter in the air and fall with hanging wing and bended head upon the earth, if haply it be earth, or in the water, if it be a lake. And there's also one of these, apparently, I would have thought we would have heard about this being on the Acropolis in Athens as well, but I guess that's just my lack of knowledge of the Acropolis. But
yeah, I was never aware of. I mean, I'm assuming it's the Acropolis that he's talking about. He talks about the tower.
Well, that's a good point. It might not be the Acropolis. That's a good point.
Which paragraph is that in again?
I'm looking 749, I believe, and he says there's one in Syria as well.
Yeah, I forgot to look that one up.
But of course, where we're going is that nobody should think that these are the gates of hell.
Right.
And nobody should think that the gods below draw through these passages departed souls into the infernal shades. How absurd to reason are such thoughts. Observe, for now I'm going to explain. But at any rate, there must have been.
I love his little comments in there. It's like, okay, sit back. I'm going to tell you what's going to go on now. I told you what people think. Now I'm going to tell you the truth. Here we go.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess unless somebody has further comments on the birds falling out of the sky at different places, the next thing he goes into is to remind us that in the earth there are seeds of things of various shapes, and many that prolong the life of man, and many that inflict disease and hasten death.
It just it seems to be of a piece with the parts about the universe not being made for humans, that the gods didn't make it for our benefit, that sort of thing.
And I guess in the end, it is fairly simply a matter of him wanting to describe the mechanism by which these bad things can happen to animals, including humans, that it's a matter of not necessarily, obviously we wouldn't think it's the elemental particles that he's talking about here, but the elemental particles form, you got this ambiguity, I guess, with seeds, whether a seed is an elemental particle or not. And it does look like he's probably talking about that.
And I think it could very well be the seeds, the atoms, that sort of thing. And then they join together in different shapes and textures. And
right. And
that's what makes the various and sundry gases and things that come out of the earth.
And some of those combinations are beneficial to us and some are harmful to us.
Exactly.
Just like he's previously talked about, animals of different types have different types of food, that they prosper from eating some things that we can't eat, and we eat things that sometimes they can't eat.
Exactly.
Well, we might be ready to plunge into the examples of 781, which are very interesting, I guess, to say the least, kind of like fables or almost like proverbs or even witchcraft type of legends about some things that cause bad reactions in some people at different times.
And I did look up the kind of lamp that he's talking about, just extinguished. That's the smell is so offensive that it stupefies. So I'm not sure what kind of a lamp he's talking about there, but
yeah. Well, I don't know if have you skipped over the trees?
I did. Yeah, I'm sorry, I did. Yeah.
This one's counterintuitive, and I have no idea what he's talking about when he says that some trees are so pernicious that by their shade that they affect the head with grievous pain if one lies on the grass beneath the boughs, beneath the limbs. So what could he be talking about there? That by the shade, Martin, you got any suggestions on how the shade of a particular tree? I guess he must end up talking about that it gives off some odor, because I think the next one, he talks about a tree whose blossoms by their smell give a present death. But in that first one, he's saying that just by the shade, they cause a headache.
I mean, it could be something like if you go under the tree, like if you have, no, I don't know the English name of that tree. You have a very common tree in Germany, which also was had some use in the belief system of the ancient Germanic tribes. And that tree, you can, when it flowers, it drips off a lot. If you park your car underneath, you have a smear on top of the car from these blossoms. So it could be something like this. In the shade, that means you're underneath a tree, and then of course that smell. And so I think it refers to that. It's not a shade.
It has to be something.
It has to be. Yeah, it has to be something, exactly, something coming off of it or something. According to the Loeb note, they mention juniper, box, and walnut under that section. There's a footnote there that references those three trees. One's a mention from Virgil, and then the box and the walnut are from a mention in Pliny. So I'll have to look those up and post them to the forum, but they have specific citations there from Pliny's Natural History.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking box and walnut. I didn't die the last time I walked under a walnut tree. So yeah, this definitely seems like one of the ones where he's not using any sort of first person observation here. This is like, that tree over there, if you walk under the shade, it's going to kill you. So, okay, well, let's not do that.
And of course, the reasoning there, for in the earth are seeds of every kind, variously mixed, which she with curious art separates and applies to things as each in its own nature most requires. And then we get to your lamp, which presumably we're talking about some kind of an oil lamp with a wick in it.
Yeah, it must be. Exactly, it must be.
And is so offensive that it can stupefy you as if you've been struck down by a fit of apoplexy. It must be some unusual oil or something.
Yeah, it must be. It must be a strong. Yeah, because I mean, if you do even blow out a candle, I mean, you can smell sort of the sulfur sometimes, or with the end of the combustion. But it's never stupefied me. So
that's right. I haven't been there either. And nor do I have any expertise on the next item, which is the woman who will fall dead asleep at the nauseous smell of an ointment made of the testicles of the beaver. Now, who has the insight into that?
I had to look that one up. That is, I mean, it's castoreum, and it is from the castor sacs of mature beavers, and it's not their testicles, but it's around that general anatomical area, let's say. But man, they actually used it they still use it, I guess, in perfumes. It was used as a food additives in the early 1900s. It's in perfumes because it gives a sort of a leather smell to certain perfumes. And I'm just like, man, who thought of this? And it even says, one of the notes in there are a couple citations for it in the Wikipedia article, but I'll just read this. Castoreum has been traditionally used in Sweden for flavoring a variety of schnapps commonly referred to as beverhöjt, which is literally beaver shout.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm like, okay.
I have never heard of any of that at all. Martin, are you familiar with that?
No, not at all. But I wanted to make one more comment on this candle. So I hope you didn't really smell sulfur. I mean, if you use the match, then from there you can smell sulfur. But from a candle, you should not smell sulfur. If you do that, you should no more use that candle.
Good point. No, you're absolutely right. I was thinking of a match. You're absolutely right. I was thinking of a match.
That a match gives off a strong smell. I don't even know that myself from experience.
If you light it, and then you get if it burns for a little bit or doesn't quite light, you can smell the sort of the sulfur. Is it sulfur? What is the chemical composition that makes it ignite?
Yeah, I mean there could be some. It could be phosphorus or sulfur. So, but most likely it's sulfur or both.
Gotcha. Absolutely right. That's exactly what I was thinking of. But yeah, the castor with the beavers, I'm like, okay, I don't know who the first person was to decide to put that in their mouth, but I'm like, okay.
Wow.
Maybe it was something someone was put as a prank. He was made to eat it. And then
I don't know. Maybe when you're processing a dead beaver to eat it or something, you come across a strong smell there.
And I suppose, I mean, if you think of like, the smell of like cured leather or it can have a pleasant smell to it, that sort of thing. So I'm like, if they could get that smell without going to the trouble of, preserving leather and things like that, it's like, yeah, sure.
Okay, well, who has had the experience of staying too long in a warm bath when your stomach is full that you become faint before you get out? Is that something that we've observed?
Well, I know you can certainly get sleepy, and I think too, I think we might want to consider too the kind of baths they were talking about. They could be talking about the public baths where you had the very hot, steamy rooms and that sort of thing. So
my father once actually. So he almost fainted. He had some health problems then, and he attributed to that.
Martin, I didn't hear the first part of what you said. You said your father had that experience?
Yeah, he almost fainted when he was in a hot bath.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Yep. So there's first person observation there from Martin on that one. So yeah, we can check that one off.
Okay. How about the suffocating power of charcoal and its stifling smell that find a passage to the brain unless you drink plenty of water beforehand?
I'm wondering if he's talking there about carbon monoxide poisoning.
I immediately went through my mind too, but is that what comes from charcoal?
Any combustion inside an enclosed space is going to create carbon monoxide, or is that right, Martin? Does that?
It depends on the conditions. If you have plenty of oxygen, it should be predominantly carbon dioxide. But what is more fatal, because at lower concentrations, is carbon monoxide. And if you do not have the right draft, that the smoke comes out, either of these two can kill you.
Yeah.
What about the issue of having drunk a lot of water before you're exposed to it? Would that be helpful somehow?
I don't think so. This will be marginally something maybe, but I think it's just some superstition.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I come from a long line of Southern Baptists, and we don't drink much alcohol down in the South where I'm from, but the next one says that the smell of wine is like a stroke that takes away the sense. Now, how can when you have a burning fever, when you're in a fever and you smell wine, that all of a sudden can overcome you? I have no clue what that could be about. Either of you got an idea?
Unless this wine is so strong, you're smelling the alcohol or something off of it. But
since I almost never had fever, and if I have, in the few instances, I wouldn't drink alcohol.
You're right, exactly. Yeah. Good point.
I mean, alcohol certainly have a strong smell to it, I guess. Not familiar with that problem.
I thought the last section there with the miners is somewhat poignant. He really paints a dire picture and a realistic one, I think, too. And this made me go back to the Avernian areas and the canary in the coal mine sort of thing. When he's talking about the vapors and the mines exhale and that sort of thing with the canaries in the coal mines.
Right. So this whole last part of the passage is talking about sulfur and bitumen with its noxious smell are generated in the bowels of the earth. I don't know that there's a significant difference, or it's significant to anybody what the difference between sulfur and bitumen is. Does anybody know what bitumen means as opposed to sulfur?
I think that's raw crude oil out of the ground.
It's the sticky part in the crude oil. If you separate it, that solid part, what you get from.
Oh, okay. Because I remember seeing things in other ancient texts about using it to glue together walls and that they used it to seal up ships and things like that.
I have to say, not a lot of mining goes on nearby anywhere I've lived before. I don't know whether you guys have any experience with mining or not. Is there any mining in the Cologne area, Martin? Or?
I mean, in the past, we had a lot of mining here, small-scale mining here, like a cottage. But the main mining area is to the northeast of Cologne, where they had, I think, at the height of the industrialization, they had about 150 large-scale coal mines in operation there, if I remember the numbers right. And there in the area proper, none is left operating.
Yeah, definitely around here, western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, that was prime coal mining country there.
I'm used to seeing all those pictures of miners with just their faces blackened with soot and so forth, but I don't know that I've necessarily been thinking about gases from the mines being harmful to their health. That's a common occurrence, especially then there's carbon monoxide, methane, all those sorts of things. Mine explosions happen because of that, and that's the reason they took the canaries into the coal mines, because the canaries would die before the men would. So if the canary died, it's like they needed to get out right away because they had hit some sort of vein of either some sort of methane or carbon monoxide or something like that was going to kill them. So I found a citation that said that the canaries were used until December 30th, 1986. Wow.
And it was a mining tradition that dated back to 1911. And they used the canaries in the coal mine to detect carbon monoxide and other toxic gases before they hurt the humans. That's from Smithsonian Magazine. And the idea of using canaries is credited to John Scott Haldane, known as the father of oxygen therapy. And his research on carbon monoxide led him to recommend using birds to detect gases in the mines. So there was a literal canary in the coal mine. So
yeah, well, I've certainly heard that figure of speech before. Why would birds be more susceptible to gases?
I think just because they're tiny and they'd be more affected more rapidly. So you take I saw photographs of little cages with canaries in them with the miners, carrying them down into the mines, and they would keep an eye on them as they did their work, and that canary had problems, they got out.
My understanding is birds have a higher metabolic rate because of their need to flight. Now that takes and it could be that then with their higher metabolic rates, they are more susceptible to poisons which go into them, basically stop the metabolism, like carbon monoxide.
Oh, very good point. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
You don't hear things like taking lizards into the coal mine or anything like that.
Right.
I've never really even thought about why birds would be more susceptible, but a high metabolism certainly would make sense.
That makes perfect sense, yeah.
And Don, what is this about? Have you not seen or heard how soon they die, how short their life is who are condemned to this sad servitude? Do miners have shorter lifespans because of those?
Well, they certainly did back then, because they would work them until they killed them and then just get a fresh crop in from the next conquest that they made. Oh yeah, I've read some things, not recently, but I've read things about the horrible conditions that were in some of the silver mines and gold mines and other mines in ancient Rome, and so it was just horrific.
So he's not talking about just getting killed from a collapse or something or an explosion or something like that.
Because you had people who owned these mines who wanted the silver and gold out of them as quickly as possible, and you just worked your enslaved people until they dropped and put in a fresh batch. So yeah, it just sounds horrific. And those pictures you talked about with the coal dust all over the men's faces, I mean, if they had the black lung and everything that would affect the miners and that sort of thing. So, I can't even imagine. And those more modern miners were getting paid to go down there, and the slaves certainly weren't getting paid.
Yeah, black lung is something I have not heard in a while, but yes, that's the disease, I guess, that goes along with
from the coal dust just lodging itself in the small tubes of your lungs. And just, man, this has been a fun passage today. Wow.
You never know when you may need to diagnose why the dead body on the side of the road has died. And so it's always important to remember that you may not be able to trace it down to a single knifing or shooting
poisoning,
or stabbing or poisoning, right? It could be it could be several causes, or you just don't know which one. Sometimes you have to keep an open mind to whether it's been poisoned or not.
He could have walked under the shade of a tree too.
Yes,
exactly. It could be that.
Exactly. Okay. Well,
this was an interesting, and that little philosophical interruption there, I think, was kind of good too to take a look at as well. So this was an interesting section.
Right. I think we basically are going to go along our merry way on the same kind of an argument next week as well, but we'll see how that goes and cross those bridges as we come to them. So we probably are at the end of a normal length session for this week. So Martin, do you have any general thoughts or either on this text or on anything else you'd like to talk about in regard to Book 6 or the poem as a whole?
Yeah, I just want to come back again on this Kuma thing. So in what text from Cicero do you refer to Kuma on there?
In On Ends itself. The main text that has the Epicurean section, the book entitled De Offici, not De Officiis. What's the Latin, Don? Gosh.
For which one? I'm sorry.
For On Ends. Oh my.
De Finibus.
Yes, De Finibus et Malorum, et Bonum and Malorum, or something
Yep.
like that. I'll see the whole
Yep.
title written out as. But you're right. The one of the books was the Tusculan Disputations, and I gather Tusculum is a different place. But if you go in On Ends to the section right before Torquatus starts talking, and I believe it is in Book 1, he says that this occurred at my house at Kuma.
Then it's a different thing, because what I was referring to was the same book, but the third book, and that it refers to that this place outside of Rome, not far from Rome, Tusculum.
Okay, yes. The I get that confused. Tusculan versus Tusculum or some other variation of that word. But yes, the Tusculan Disputations is one of his major books. And then this other one is the On Ends book is an entirely separate book, both of which have significant sections talking about Epicurean philosophy in them. But the one that we tend to talk about the most, which has the long discourse from Torquatus, is On Ends.
Yeah, and which book is Torquatus strong?
Pardon?
I forgot it already.
Say again?
In which book of in this book, On End, it consists of 5 books actually, no?
And it's either book 1 or book 2. The first, because he after that turns to the Stoics, but I think he starts with the Epicurean section. So I believe it's the latter part of book 1 and book 2 maybe.
I'm looking at a dictionary of Greek and Roman geography from 1854 that's in the Perseus digital library. And if you will indulge me, it's talking here about Cicero's villa. It says, in the latter ages of the Republic, it's as in Kuma. I looked up Cumae. Cumae's neighborhood began to be frequented by the Roman nobles as a place of retirement and luxury, but these established their villas rather at Baiae and Misenum than at Cumae itself, the situation of which is far less beautiful or agreeable. Both these sites, that's Baiae and Misenum, were, however, included in a municipal sense in the territory of Cumae, and hence we find Cicero applying the name of Cumanum to his villa, which was in full view of Puteoli, and must therefore have been situated on the bay of Baiae, or at least on the east side of the ridge which separates it from Cumae. So it was in the district of Cumae, but not in the village itself.
Well, that still doesn't tell me how close is it to Naples. Is there only one Kuma?
It's in Campania. It says Cumae is in Campania. Let's find out how far it's from Naples.
Kuma is actually quite close to Naples. That's why I didn't think that they could travel there for the weekend. But then that weekend thing is in the third book at Tusculum. So I still didn't find in the book the Kuma part. So I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I'll have to look up to see how far it is away from. I'm not sure my Italian geography. It says I found one thing here that says visit Cumae in Naples. So and another one it says from Cumae to Naples.
It is close. That one I know it's close.
Yeah, it was an important ancient town close to the busy current city of Naples.
Yeah, but that's 200 kilometers off Rome, no? So that's nothing you can just go at that time.
Right.
Just go for the weekend.
Because you need to load up your wagons and everything else and your household, and so it was so his villa was evidently in the neighborhood of Cumae and not in Cumae itself. So,
and I'm not sure whether that's where he ended up being beheaded or not. It seems like there was when Cicero finally was killed. I don't believe that was in Rome itself. Yeah, and another huge gap in my knowledge of this is that Virgil, these Virgilian, maybe there were some other poets as well. It seems like they were associated with potentially that area. And I don't know much about Virgil at all. I know he made the one comment in one of his poems about Lucretius, but being a happy Lucretius or whatever. I can't believe I can't quote that.
How embarrassing. You don't have everything committed
Exactly.
to memory.
Especially that quote from Virgil. That's one of the most famous Roman quotes. I had it memorized for a long time. You know what I'm talking about?
I'm not sure if I know what you're talking about.
Come on. It's actually, yes, it's okay. Oh, this is not a very good rendition of it, but he says, happy was he who learned the causes of things and put under his feet all fear, inexorable fate, and the noisy. This is a terrible translation. I read there. Oh my gosh, there is. I even remember knew the Latin, but yeah, one of Horace doesn't mention Epicurus all that often, but this is, or I don't know, anybody mentions Lucretius actually, except this reference to Lucretius in Virgil, where he says, in fact, this is one of the famous lines in all of history. It's the quote about, happy was he who was able to know the nature of things and to, Ovid says the verses of the sublime Lucretius will perish only when a day will bring the end of the world. So that's what Ovid said. But Virgil had, it's so ridiculous. This is like the most famous quote. Happy was he who was able to know the nature of things and to, it's very similar to the opening of book one about Epicurus himself trampling over religion and so forth. But Don, you ought to know that. I'm surprised that you don't. You're not on top of this.
You stumped the panel on that one. I see a translation here, doesn't give where it's from, but happy the person who has learned the cause of things and has put under his or her feet all fear, inexorable fate, and the noisy strife of the hell of greed.
Yeah, that's the one I was reading that I think is not probably the greatest translation, but that is it.
Oh,
okay.
Felix qui potuit rerum cognoscere causas.
Yes. That's the Latin that I memorized.
Fortunate is he who is able to know the causes of things.
But it continues on. That's a good start to it, but it continues on to the even better part.
Verse 490 of book 2 of the Georgics.
Okay. It is literally translated as fortunate who was able to know the causes of things. But they cut off the important part, because you're also wanting to include the part about
John Dryden.
John Dryden is worthless, in my opinion. I don't know if I can find a way to include that in the podcast now. But whenever I see it, he's just one of these guys he wants to be such a poet that he obscures the Felix qui potest rerum cognoscere causas is the first part of it, but it continues on.
Happy who had the skill to understand nature's hid causes, and beneath his feet all terrors cast and death's relentless doom.
Yeah, because the latter part of it is he's casting beneath his feet the fear of hell and of,
he does go on, doesn't he? And the loud roar of greedy Acheron, blessed is he who knows the rural gods, Pan, old Sylvanus, and the sister nymphs.
Yes. So the Latin is Felix qui potuit rerum cognoscere causas, atque metus omnis et inexorable fatum. So he goes against fate too. I mean, this is huge. Because it's against determinism and subjects to the feet the roar of Acheron and the terror and the roar of Acheron or something.
Him nor the rods of public power can bend, nor kingly purple, nor fierce feud that drives brother to turn on brother, nor descent of day. Wow, okay, that does go on. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have to check out Virgil now.
Yeah, well, I don't know that there's an awful lot, unfortunately, beyond that. But this particular passage, which is attributed to be talking about Virgil, but for all we know, I mean, it could be a reference to Epicurus himself, because everything here is really a statement that mirrors book one.
That's a good line. That's a good line.
It really summarizes a lot of the main points of Epicurean philosophy right there in one famous phrase from Virgil. So
you know me, I'm always up for the Latin. So
yeah. Well, that particular phrase, I bungled finding it very quickly this morning, but that particular section and quotation is one of the most famous. At least I read these commentators say it's one of the most famous. So at one point I had that memorized, but I obviously don't anymore.
Oh yeah, the Latin has like inexorable fate, inexorabile fatum. Mm-hmm. Oh wow, that's good.
And so, not just frees us from it, but subiecit pedibus. I mean, I think that means throws under the feet.
Under feet, yeah. Strepitumque.
So it's clearly a reference either to Lucretius or, in fact, I think that I've seen this referenced a lot when people talk about why it makes no sense that Jerome would say that Lucretius killed himself. They say that Virgil would very likely have not described Lucretius as Felix, as happy,
Right.
If he indeed committed suicide.
Right.
And Virgil would have been in a position to know that, supposedly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's a good line. I'm gonna have to mark that one down. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that one at some point then.
And you mentioned whether he's talking about Lucretius or whether he's talking about Epicurus. And I mean, if you talk about Lucretius, you're basically by extension talking about Epicurus. So.
Right. But of course, all these sophisticated experts, of which I will never be one, are able to find sections in Virgil's poem, and they look for echoes or from Lucretius. They look for patterns or different places where maybe Virgil has picked up things from Lucretius, and that's the kind of thing that you really have to, in my mind, devote your life to studying the details of these kind of poems to be able to pull things like that out. Yeah. But apparently Virgil and some other poets from that period, Catullus, I don't know anything about Catullus, but I believe Catullus is one of those poets that from that period that people say are influenced by Lucretius, whatever.
So many texts, so little time.
Yeah, exactly. And I've just rambled far too long to close it out. I'll have to really work to edit.
Yeah, good luck on editing that part.
Yeah.
There's some interesting stuff in there, but yeah, good luck editing that.
Yeah. Martin, does that complete you for the day?
I'm done for the day. Thanks.
Okay. And Don, anything else?
I am completed for the day.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, appreciate it as always. We'll come back and do it again next week. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.